Hi everyone. My name is Chilambe Clement from Clement Chilambe Tutorials, and in this tutorial we are going to discuss the introduction to medical parasitology. So this is the first video of this playlist or the series of medical parasitology, and therefore it is important that we discuss just the introduction, which means we are going to discuss the basics of medical parasitology, which encompasses the terminologies, the classifications, and some other things that we need to know basically for just an introduction. Yes, so an outline for today is here. The outline is that in the introduction, or in this introduction to medical parasitology, we are going to discuss the definition of parasitology and also the parasite. What is a parasite? What are the definitions of a parasite? And we're going to discuss the classification of parasites of medical importance. Then apart from that, we are going to discuss the definition of parasitological terminologies. This is the outline of this lecture, and we are going to focus just on this one. And then we'll look at what we're going to also look at in the next lecture. Right, let's get right into it. So parasitology in general. What is parasitology? So in general, the study of the biology of parasites is what we refer to as parasitology. Okay, so in parasitology, we just study the biology, okay, the biology of parasites. And then let's now get into the main medical parasitology that we'll be discussing, and the key definition of this entire series or lectures that we are going to have to focus on, which is medical parasitology. So when we talk of medical parasitology, what do we really refer to? What do we discuss in medical parasitology? One, in medical parasitology, we discuss what? The organisms or parasites that infect humans. Okay? So the organisms or parasites that parasitize or infect humans. Then number two, we do not only end there. We don't end on just identifying the organism. We go further to discuss the relationships between parasites and host or vectors. Yes. So not only knowing the relationships between parasites and host vectors, we also go further and discuss the diseases, the clinical features, and also the host response of the same parasites that infect humans. We do not also end there. We go further and lastly discuss what? The methods of diagnosis, the treatment, the prevention, and also the control. So as we begin this series of medical parasitology, I want you to remember that when we start discussing the individual parasites that are of medical importance, please focus on four things. Number one, focus on the organism itself. What is this organism? What is the name of this organism? Secondly, discuss the relationship. Think about the relationship between the parasites and the host or the vector. Okay, what is the relationship? Why is this organism targeting this particular host? Right? Then apart from that, be able to know what disease does this parasite cause? Okay, what are the clinical features of that disease? And how does the host itself respond to that disease caused by that particular parasite? Not only there, since we know that the clinical features, the host responses, and the diseases, that tells us something, right? Then we go further now to discuss the methods of diagnosis. We go further to discuss the treatment, the prevention, and the control. Once you know all these four components, then you are good to go, especially on that particular parasites that you are looking at. Yes, you cannot say I'm looking at this parasite, be it Plasmodium falciparum or be it Entamoeba histolytica, and you just say I'll just know the name of that organism. It's not enough. Know the name, the relationship, know the diseases that it causes, the clinical features and host response, and most importantly, for public health purposes, make sure that you know the diagnosis, the treatment, the prevention, and control. This is actually what defines your profession. Now, what is the importance of these parasites? Yes, we are actually talking about these parasites because they're important, right? What's the importance of these medical parasites? Number one, they are causative agents. Yes, we are learning about these parasites. Why? Because they are causative agents of major public health problems of the world. It's important to discuss them because they are a major public concern. Two, they cause untold suffering and death in the world today. Yes, because they do these two things, that is causative agents of major public health problems and also causing suffering and death. It's important that we discuss these parasites that are of medical importance. Now, what are the recent estimates of prevalence of parasites in the world today? So let's just talk about 3 so far. Okay, that's just the estimated prevalence. This is just to let you know that yes, we do have parasites of medical concern, and these are estimated numbers that we can talk about. Okay, the estimated prevalence for helminths, for example, here. So we have this side, we have the parasites, and this side we do have the estimated prevalence. And therefore, when we look at this, the first one here, right? We take helminths 1.5 billion. That's the estimated prevalence of 2019 by the World Health Organization. Then we talk of this parasite here, the strongyloides staphylococcus, 600 million. That is the estimate itself. And then we talk of malaria, which is also a major public health concern, especially in Africa. Look at the numbers, 229 million estimated prevalence. So look at these numbers. So this tells us something, that studying medical parasitology is actually very important for combating these major public health problems that we're facing today, and also for ensuring that we know the methods of diagnosis, we know how we need to prevent ourselves, and we also need to know how to control these parasites because they cause untold suffering and death. Okay, now let's talk about a parasite. What is the definition of a parasite itself? So a parasite has been defined by several people in more or less the same way, right? Books, we have different books, research papers, and we do also have some documents which actually talks about a parasite. So when we talk of medical parasitology, there are some key definitions that we can say, okay, people define these in so many ways, but here are the definitions that you need to know of a parasite. Okay, first one, parasites. When we talk of parasites, we are referring to those organisms, right? Organisms that find nourishment, keyword, and habitat on another living organism and may or may not harm, keywords, may or may not harm the host, but without killing it like the predator would do, okay? It may harm the host. It may not harm the host. Okay, so those are the key definitions or keywords in this definition of the parasites. So these are parasites. Then two, when you talk of a parasite, some definition we can put it in this way. So parasites is an organism that lives temporarily or permanently. These are keywords. Temporarily or permanently on or within another living organism, which may be a plant or an animal called a host. But in this case, we're talking about human parasitology. So actually, we are referring to an animal, isn't it? For the purpose of obtaining food or shelter. These are keywords, my friends, when we're actually talking about the definition of parasitology. Look at the second definition. The second definition was like, okay, it's an organism that lives temporarily or permanently on or within a living organisms for the purpose of obtaining food or shelter. So if there's some organism that is actually living within or temporarily or permanently on or within another living organism, but not for the purpose of obtaining food or not for shelter, then that is not a parasite. It's something else, right? Maybe we would also want to define the host, isn't it? So the host is defined as the organism that harbors another living organism. In this case, what we mean by another living organism, we mean what? A parasite. Okay, that can either be externally or internally. All right, so that is a host. That's the definition of the host. So now you know what we mean when we say the host. You know what we mean when we say the parasite. All right. Now let's talk about human parasitology, and let's look at the scope. Right. There are three things that we need to know when we come to mainly the classification of these parasites, right? So we have the components of protozoology, we have the component of helminthology, we have the component of entomology, right? So in terms of the protozoology, we mean the protozoa. These are single-celled organisms. And when we talk of helminths, we mean what? We are talking about worms, and they are actually in the category of what? They are actually in the category of helminthology. And then arthropods, when we refer to insects, the ticks and the mites, that all makes up what? The entomology part of it. Okay, so the arthropodology, which is the entomology. So we look at this, look at what we have here. So the anthropology itself as a scope, we have the entomology, which actually refers to insects, and then we have the archaeology, which actually refers to ticks and mites. So the entomology and the archaeology, what makes this scope, which is the anthropodology. That is very important to know. Okay. So these just the insects of the most interest in human parasitology that we are actually going to discuss on this channel. Yeah, being the vectors of several parasitic infections. Now, let's discuss the classification, right? The classification. So classification, let's discuss the general classification. General classification, which actually refers to the animal parasites that are classified according to the International Code of Taxonomy. Okay, we need to know this. So general classification, put it in the mind that under general classification, we're actually referring or classifying these parasites according to International Code of Taxonomy. And according to that code, each parasite needs to have what? The kingdom, the phylum, the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species. Okay, so the kingdom, the phylum, the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species, right? So in classification, the scientific parasitic name is of two parts. Okay, so the scientific parasitic name is of two types. So we have the genetic name and the species name. So these are the two things that we need to know. Another genetic name we have which is just one word, Plasmodium. That's just an example, right? Plasmodium, it can be a genetic name. We're talking about Plasmodium falciparum, isn't it? So the species name consists of what? The two words, Plasmodium falciparum. This is the species name. So now you know the difference between the genetic name and the species name. When we talk about the genus, genus means just group of close related species. And when we talk of species, we mean population with the same genetic characters. Yes. So these are the things. Basically, this is the introduction to medical parasitology, and this is what you need to know, right? You need to know the classification. We've actually discussed the genus and species right here. So let's also talk about another classification, right? Classification, let's now classify them in this way, right? This is human parasitology. So remember, we talked about the scope of the human parasitology, medical parasitology itself. We, of course, did the medical entomology. Of course, we discussed the arthropodology, where we said we have entomology for insects, and then we have archaeology for ticks and mites. So under entomology, let's start with medical protozoology. So medical protozoology, we have these classes here. The class Lobosia, we find the Sarcodina, Bryozopods, and then we have class Zoomastigophora or Flagellata, and then we have the class Sporozoa, which is actually the Epicomplexa, and then we have class Sidiata, and we have class Microsporidia. Okay, so this is under what? Medical protozoology. And under medical helminthology, we have class Nematoda, class Trematoda, and class Cestoda. Then under medical entomology, we have the class Insecta, class Arachnida, class Crustacea, or class Crustacea, then class Chiropoda, and class Diplopoda. So these are actually the classes that we have in human parasitology. And of course, when we talk of medical protozoology, medical helminthology, and medical entomology, these are the things that we are going to focus on entirely as we discuss the series of these parasitology lectures. Now, here is another taxonomic classification of protozoa. Okay, so we've now gone deeper. Right, we're just discussing the scope there. Now this is protozoa, this is protozoology, right? So the kingdom, look at this is just a general example. Okay, so look at this. We have the kingdom is Protista, the kingdom Protista. Remember what we said about the general classification. It needs to have what? The kingdom, the phylum, the genus, the species, the order, the family, and all those things. Now when we talk of the protozoa here, the protozoa, look at this example. This is the subkingdom. So kingdom is Protista. Subkingdom is what? Let me use this pointer. So the kingdom is Protista. And then the subkingdom here is the protozoa. The protozoa is a sub what? Kingdom. Now, the phylum. We have Sarcomastigophora. That is just one. And then we have the Apicomplexa, which the Apicomplexa has no organelle of locomotion. And then the Cediophora, the cedio, meaning they actually move what? By cedia. And then we have Microspora. By the name itself, Microspora, we know that they are spore forming. Now, under Sarcomastigophora, Sarcomastigophora can be divided into these two, the subphylum, right? So we have the Sarcodina and the Mastigophora. So the Sarcodina, they move by Pseudopodia, and the Mastigophora, they move by what? Flagella. And under the Sarcodina, this is where we have examples. The genus example is the Entamoeba. And then we have, under the Mastigophora, the Giardia. So the Giardia move by Flagella. And the Entamoeba move by Pseudopodia. So these are general classification. This is what you need to know. When you know this, then you are the medical parasitology. So genus example, we have the Entamoeba and we have the Giardia, and the species Histolytica and Lambria. We said genus has got one word. No, not one word, but genus. But when you look at the species here at the end, it's got the genus name and also, we remember the genetic name that we discussed, and also the species what? Name. All right. So under the genus, we have Entamoeba Histolytica. That's the species. That's the one that we need. This is the product that we need. And then we have Giardia lambria as an example. Okay. This is just under protozoa subkingdom, and under phylum as under phylum as Sarcomastigophora, and as subphylum as Sarcodina or Mastigophora. Then the Apicomplexa. Apicomplexa, they have no organelle of locomotion, and the genus example here is a Plasmodium. Malaria, malaria causing species. Now the species, we have the Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium malariae, Plasmodium ovale, and Plasmodium knowlesi. Okay, there is also that species. Yeah, just that it's rare. Then we have under the Cediophora, which move by cedia, we have the Balantidium under the genus. The species example is the Balantidium coli. And under the Microspora, spore forming, we have Enterocytozoa. Okay, an example of the species is what? The Enterocytozoa bienniusi. So this is actually the taxonomic classification of protozoa kingdom Protista, just as that an example. So this is under protozoology, right? Look at the first class. The class is Robosia. So we talked about all those classes there, and now when we take a look at an example here. So class Robosia, these are passed in stew. Okay, these are passed in stew of the host, And this is the class where Entamoeba histolytica is found, right? So this is under protozoology. If you remember that our chart very well, this is under protozoology, and this is where we have the Sarcomastigophora. Okay. So in this class of parasites, the parasites move by means of pseudopodia. So an example of the parasite that move by pseudopodia, the genus is Entamoeba, and the species is Entamoeba histolytica. And they multiply by binary fission. This is very important. And they form motionless resistant cysts. Okay, so we are going to understand this better when we start looking at the individual parasites, because now you get to understand the stages of the development of this particular parasite. And most importantly, we'll be looking at the life cycle, which are very, very essential in understanding this individual parasite. So this is class Lobosia. And we talk of, when you look at this picture here, this picture is showing what? The cyst. This is a trophozoite. And here is showing a trophozoite down here. Okay. So when we know these stages, actually helps us to know the things that we discussed at the very beginning. The scope of medical parasitology. We said, of course, we'll discuss on the diseases, clinical features, and also focus on the method of diagnosis, the treatment, prevention, and also the control. Okay, these stages of the parasites helps us to understand that, helps us to come up with the treatment, helps us to come up with the methods of diagnosis. Which method are we going to use in order to get what the parasite that's causing or that's infecting this human, right? So look at the trophozoite and look at the cyst here. Look at the cyst, by the way. So the part of the cyst, we have the cytoplasm there. Then we have the cyst wall. Actually, the cyst wall is the first one. Then chromatoid bar, the talk of genetics here. And then we have the cytoplasm, we have the central karyosome, and even the peripheral what? The peripheral chromatin. So these parts are actually very important in understanding all these things that we are talking about here. Then under class Mastigophora, remember what we've discussed under Lobosia, isn't it? And an example that we can get from there. They multiply by binary fission, and also they have resistant cysts, right? Now, how about class Zoomastigophora? Zoomastigophora, they move by means of what? Flagellum. But class Lobosia is pseudopodia, right? Now, these move, let me use this one. These move by means of flagellum, and they multiply by division of the body longitudinally. And parasites of this class, which are pathogens, examples are trypanosomes, number 1. 2, Giardia lambria. 3, Trichomonas vaginalis. These are under class what? Zoomastigophora. So you need to know this. You need to know this. Give an example under each class. This is medical protozoology. So under medical protozoology, we have class Lobosia that we've discussed. You're able to give an example and to explain what it is and how it moves, then and how it divides, right? So we said binary fission, this we've said longitudinally, and we have these examples down here. Okay. Then we have sporozoa. The sporozoa have no motor organ like the flagella or cilia to assist with the movement. There's no locomotion, okay? They do not have much capacity for movement. What do they do instead? They just move slightly, amoeboid change of form. That is what they do. An example is Plasmodium species, which is a causative agent of malaria. And these species of Plasmodium are Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, and Plasmodium ovale, and also Plasmodium malariae. So the apical complex. Remember the apical complex. Look at this. This is just a picture that is depicting the sporozoa itself, the apical complex, right? Look at these parts. When we look at these parts, you can see the organelles there. Of course, it's got some of the common organelles that we know, includes the mitochondrion. It's got the Golgi complex, the nucleus, and also it's got the apicoplast, the club-shaped lobe trees, the inner membrane here, complex, the alveoli, and the rod-shaped micronemes, and all these, the conoid with polar rings, and we have the dense granules, and we have the acidocalcisomes, yes. So this is class Sporozoa. and you're able to give examples, you're able to describe what it is and how it moves, right? Then class ciliata. Under class ciliata, the parasite in this class move by means of cilia. From the name itself, class ciliata. So the pathogenic one is Balantidium coli. Balantidium coli is under class ciliata. These multiply by transverse division of the body and they produce a resistance cysts. Yes, they produce resistance cysts. So this is under class ciliata. Nothing complicated, just the cool description of what class ciliata under medical protozoology is. So, when we talk of helminthology now, helminthology, we are done with protozoology, right? Helminthology, taxonomic classification of helminths. So we have helminths as the kingdom, by the way. Then the subkingdom is metazoa. And then we have the phylum, the class, and the genus, right? So now, look at the subkingdom. The subkingdom, helminths, let's talk of the metazoa. Metazoa, the phylum, two phylum, the nemate helminths and the platyhelminths. So the nemate helminths here, they're roundworms, they appear round in cross-section, and they have body cavities, a straight alimentary canal, and an anus. This is what you know. So these are roundworms, number one. That's what making them different. They appear round in cross-section, they have body cavities, and they are straight. They have a straight alimentary canal and an anus. An example of a nemate helminth is nematoda as a class, found in intestines. That's where we find it. The nematoda found in intestines, the muscle tissues, the blood circulations, and also what? The organs. And the genus examples includes the Ascaris, which is the roundworms, Trichuris, which is the whipworm, the Anthylostoma, which is the hookworm, the Necata, which is the hookworm as well, and the Enterobius, which is the pinworm or threadworm, and the strongyloids. So these are genus examples under helminths. The most basic example that you need to know is what is the phylum? I mean, is it a nemate helminth? Or is it a platyhelminth? So under nemate helminth, we know that we have nematoda here. Then platyhelminth, flatworms here. So dorsoventrally flattened, no body cavity, and if present, the alimentary canal is blind ending. Yes. So you see the difference between platyhelminths and nemate helminths. Examples under platyhelminths, we have adult tapeworms, which are actually found in the cestodes, right? Cestodes, which are adult tapeworms, which are found in the intestine of the host. Then we do have these. What do they have? They have a head, which we call the scolex, with sucking organs. They have a segmented body but no alimentary canal, and each body segment is a hermaphrodite. Okay, it's the hermaphrodite. An example of the genus here is the Taenia, the tapeworm, Taenia solium, Taenia saginata. Okay, so we're going to discuss these things later. But the Taenia, which is a tapeworm, is a good example of a flatworm. Remember, nemate helminth is roundworms, but platyhelminth is what? A flatworm, just a flatworm. So we have this. Then under platyhelminths, we have trematodes. Trematodes, what's the description? These are non-segmented. They usually leaf-shaped with two suckers, but no distinct head. And then they have an alimentary canal and are usually hermaphrodite and leaf-shaped. Then schistosomes are the exception. They are thread-like and have separate sexes. So we're going to talk about schistosomia, schistosomes. Yes, schistosomes is another example. We'll look at all these things. Remember, this is just the general parasitology, and we're just classifying this so that you know. Yes. So now, trematodes, these are non-segmented, but cestodes are what? Segmented. And these, they have an alimentary canal, but these cestodes do not have an alimentary canal. So an example of trematodes is what? The fascioloposis, the liver flack, and the schistosoma, which is not leaf-shaped. So schistosoma, which is an exception here that we talked about, and the fascioloposis, which is actually the liver flax. So we'll talk about that when we start talking about what? The flax. Helminths. So under metazoa, helminths are a division of eukaryotic parasites that live inside their host, and they are actually worm-like organisms that live and feed off these living hosts. That's what helminths are. So what do they do? What do they do? Remember, in the definition of a parasite, what these helminths do, they receive nourishment and protection. Okay? But in the name of receiving nourishment and protection, what do? They disrupt their host's nutrient absorption. That is what causes what? Weakness and disease. So in general, these parasites do not want to harm us. The reason as to why we get harmed when these parasites are inside us is because they feed on what we also depend on. So in turn, we get weak, and because of our immune system and some of the components that these parasites releases, that leads to diseases. So that's about helminths. Remember the keywords that we've just talked about. And one thing that I need you to remember, eukaryotic parasites. Okay, helminths are a division of eukaryotic parasites. Yes, unlike other examples that we're going to look at. Yes, examples of important intestinal metazoa. We have the tricharis, which is a whipworm. This tricharis is a soil-transmitted helminth. Okay, it's prevalent in warm, humid conditions, of course, that is right. And then this one can cause diarrhea, rectal prolapse, and anemia in heavily infected people. That's a tricharis, the whipworm. It has intestinal metazoa. These are intestinal nematodes. Remember about the classification under metazoa. We're discussing the metazoa here. Then Asalesotoma and Neceta, these are actually hookworms. They are a major cause of anemia in the tropics. And then Enterobius, the pinworm or threadworm. These are prevalent in cold and temperate climates, but they're actually rare in the tropics. And they're actually found mainly in children, these Enterobius. They are examples of what? Intestinal nematodes. Okay, so we've discussed all these tricharis, the Asalestoma necata, and the Enterobius. Now, we continue. We also have another example, which is the strongyloids. The strongyloids inhabit the small bowel, of course, and infection is more severe in the immunosuppressed people or immunocompromised people, such as those that are suffering from HIV and AIDS, and also those that malnutrition, and also those that are having the intercurrent disease. So strongyloids take advantage of that, and that's why they infect. Now, another example under the intestinal nematode is the ascaris, which is actually roundworm. So the ascaris roundworm, they are found worldwide in conditions of poor hygiene. They're transmitted by the fecal or root, and they're actually adult worms which lives in the small intestines and causes eosinophilia. They cause what? Eosinophilia. Yeah. So this is about ascaris, ascaris lumbricoids. We'll discuss these when we start discussing individual parasites. Then we are from talking about those intestinal ones. Then there are those blood. Okay, examples of important metazoa and the nematodes which have to do with what? The blood. So we have one, the Onchocerca volvulus, transmitted by a black fly. This is just a microbial parasite which can cause visual impairment, blindness, and severe itching of the skin in those infected. That is the Onchocerca volvulus, transmitted by a black fly. Then the Ucharella bancrofti, this is the major causative agent of lymphatic filariasis. This is just straightforward. And the Brugia malai is another microfilarial parasite that causes lymphatic filariasis as well. Okay. So the important of again, let's talk of nematodes. So we migrate to nematodes now. So intestinal nematodes, we have Taenia saginata and the Taenia soria. Two people, these two. Taenia saginata, they're acquired by ingestion of contaminated and cooked beef, and then a common infection but causes minimal symptoms. And then Taenia sorium, these are acquired by ingestion of contaminated and cooked pork that contains cysticide. Less common but causes cystoscopy, a systemic disease where cysticide insists in muscles, and then they also go in the brain, and that may lead to epilepsy. This is very dangerous. Remember, uncooked pork. Yes, and maybe those that don't eat pork do not expect them to have Taenia soria. We do not. So you can suspect them. You can suspect that they have Taenia saginata. So these are cestodes. Yes, these are examples of cestodes that we're going to discuss here. Then we have the liver flux. Oh, not liver, but trematodes, right? So cestodes and trematodes. Look at the trematodes that we have. We have the Fasciola hepatica. which causes fascioloposis. So fasciola hepatica, which is actually liver fly, primarily a parasite of ruminants. And then we have the Cronocys sinensis, which is actually also a liver fly, but this one is widespread in China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And this parasite is acquired by ingestion of effective Metascaria in raw or pickled fish. So we have other examples under this. We have the Schistosoma hematobium, the Schistosoma mansoni, and the Schistosoma japonicum, which we are going to discuss later. So these are under metazoa and trematodes, to be specific. Okay, so now let's look at the definition of terminologies. We already defined what a parasite is. What did we say? A parasite is a living organism that acquires some of its basic nutrition requirements through its intimate contact with another living organism. Okay, parasites may be simple, unicellular protozoa. Okay, so protozoology is unicellular, and then we have the complex multicellular metazoa, which are helminths, isn't it? And then a eukaryote. What is a eukaryote? Remember, I think we have already discussed what a parasite is, definition. We talked about all those things. Remember, we talked about a parasite can be an organism which may live temporarily or permanently on or within another living organisms for the purpose of obtaining food or shelter. Yeah. Eukaryote, a cell with a well-defined chromosome in a membrane-bound nucleus. We know eukaryotes, isn't it? All parasitic organisms are eukaryotes. So all parasitic organisms are eukaryotes. You do not have to get confused with that. No, you do not have to. So other terminologies of defined a parasite and also eukaryote. Other definitions that we'd love to talk about are these. Endoparasite, an endoparasite. So an endoparasite is a parasite that lives within another living organism. So an endoparasite, in other words, we can say it's just a parasite which lives within the body of the host. Okay, endo. It lives within the body of the host and is said to cause an infection. Yeah, it is said to cause an infection. So normally what we use, most of the protozoan and the helmintic parasites causing human disease are actually endoparasites. This is what we need to know. So an example of endoparasite is the Entamoeba histolytica here. And then we have an ectoparasite. An ectoparasite, these inhabit only the body surface of the host without penetrating the tissue. Okay. So in other words, these are the parasite that lives on the external surface of another living organism, such as lice or ticks, right? Let me use this one. That's lice and ticks and mite. These are ectoparasites. I think we can really relate to that properly. Yes, and I also just want to let you know that these two terms, the ectoparasite and endoparasite, they are just a classification also of parasites. So apart from these two, I can also talk about what? Free-living parasites. Okay, free-living parasites. So free-living parasites are non-parasitic stages of active existence which live independent of the host. Yeah, they live independent of the host. An example of that, that's an exception. Yeah, you might be asked about that. That's why I brought it up. So the non-parasitic stages of active existence which live independent of the host. An example that I can give is the cystic stage of the Naegleria fowleri. Yes. So we have an endoparasite, ectoparasite, and another class that we can talk about is the free-living parasite. It lives freely. Then under endoparasites, remember under endoparasite, this endoparasite can further be divided into obligate parasite. So the parasite which cannot exist without a host. So can't live without a host. An example is a Plasmodium. And another example is what? The Toxoplasma gondii. So they are obligate parasites. So this obligate parasite is under endoparasite. Okay. And then apart from that, we have okay, we'll talk about them that side. Then we have zoonotic parasites. This is an animal, is normally the host, but which also infects what? man. You're a host, but also infects man. That's the definition of what? Zoonotic parasite. So you need to know what they mean by zoonotic parasite, the obligate parasite, the ectoparasite, and also the what? The endoparasite. Now, facultative parasites. Facultative parasites is also under endoparasites, right? So facultative parasites are organisms which may either live as parasitic form or as free living form, okay? So can exist in the free living state, alternating of generations. An example is a what? Strongyloids decolaris is a facultative parasite, okay? It's different from what? An obligate. I can't live without you, you get? Yeah, you are an obligate parasite. Intermittent parasites, these visit and leave the host at intervals, e.g. micropredators, leeches, ticks, mosquitoes, fleas. They are seasons, they visit and leave the host at intervals. Just that. So those are known as what? Intermittent parasites. Okay, then there are also what are known as accidental parasites, which are not actually here. So accidental parasites, these are parasites which just infect an unusual host. Yeah, one example is Echinococcus granulosus, which infects man accidentally, which gives rise to hard dilated cysts. So we have also accidental parasites. We've already talked about facultative parasites, and here we also have non-pathogenic parasites. Non-pathogenic parasites live in or on the body of the host, and they do not cause disease. Those are what? Non-pathogenic parasites. Then we have opportunistic parasites. These cause illness in immunocompromised individuals. They are important due to increasing prevalence of what? HIV and AIDS. So we also discuss them. Why? Because they affect this group of people as well. So this is the term. Then another term that you need to know is a vector. A vector is a living carrier. An example is an arthropod, right? So a vector is actually a living carrier. An example is an arthropod. So a living carrier that transports a pathogenic organism from an infected to a non-infected host. So a living carrier that transports a pathogenic organism from an infected to a non-infected host. That's a vector. You need to know this. A vector is an everyday language in medical parasitology. Then there are two types of vectors. We have mechanical vectors and also biological vectors. Okay, so now we've gone to these. Remember, we're discussing terminologies, and we just reached on vectors, and maybe we'll talk about what the host as well. Right. Yes. So when we talk of the biological vectors, this transmits the parasite after some biological development of the parasite to make it infective for a susceptible host. So it needs to develop first. Okay. It needs to undergo some development to make it infective. An example is a mosquito. Remember the life cycle of a mosquito in a human and also in the mosquito itself. So mosquitoes involved in the transmission of various filarial roundworms and malaria parasites. Yes. So we know that since they do have the life cycle, we have the biological development of that very parasite. And then we have the mechanical. The mechanical transmits the parasites in a short time, as such, without undergoing any development or biological change. An example is a transfusion. We have transfusion transmitted parasites. Okay. An example is Toxoplasma gondii is a transfusion transmitted parasite, plus other parasites also, okay, that can infect a human being. So now you know the difference between biological and mechanical. Biological needs to undergo some development. Mechanical does not need to undergo any development or biological change, no. And we have examples here. Okay, then we talk of the host. So the host is an organism which harbors the parasite and provides nourishment and shelter to latter, and is relatively larger than the parasite. Okay, that is what we are talking about. So it's relatively larger than the parasite. So it's a non-parasitic member of the association. Yes, and this organism can live in or on the organism in or on which the parasite lives or an organism that harbors the parasite usually larger than the parasite. This is actually the killer definition, not these things that I wrote here. Look at these. I mistakenly spelled this. So an organism that harbors the parasite usually larger than the parasite is what is known as the host. And then definitive host. So now, the host may be of the following types, right? We have the definitive hosts. So the definitive host is the host in which the adult parasite, the adult or sexually mature stage of the parasite lives. In other words, the host in which the adult parasite lives and undergoes sexual reproduction. Yes. An example is a mosquito that acts as a definitive host in malaria. So the definitive host may be a human or any other living being. However, in majority of human parasitic infections, man is a definitive host. Okay, the filaria, the roundworm, and the hookworm are the examples that we can have. The organism in which they adult and all that. Then we have the intermediate host. The intermediate host, this is the organism in which the parasite lives during a period of its development only. Okay. The host harboring the larvae or sexual stage of the parasite is an intermediate host, one and the same thing. So, in other words, the host in which the larvae stage of the parasite lives or sexually multiplication takes place. That's what we call an intermediate parasite. And in some parasites, in some parasites, two different intermediate hosts may be required to complete different larval stages. Okay, that is what we need to know. So I'm saying this is an exception and I have to include it, and you need to know that in some parasites, two different intermediate hosts may be required to complete different larval stages. Okay, so these are known as the first and second intermediate hosts respectively. So the first one, or it can actually be the second intermediate host. We have the paratenic host. The paratenic host is an intermediate host whose presence may be required for completion of a parasite's life cycle, but in which no development of the parasite occurs. This is nice, right? An intermediate host whose presence may be required for completion of parasite life cycle, but in which no development of the parasite occurs. So in some other terms, we can say a paratenic host is a host in which the larval stage of the parasite remains viable without further development, right? So such host transmits the infection to another host. No viral development. No development of the parasite occurs. That's the most important thing. Then we have the reservoir host. So the reservoir host in an endemic area, a parasitic infection is continuously kept up by being by the presence of the host, which we said the host harbors the parasite and acts as an important source of infection to other susceptible hosts. So in this case, reservoir host, we are saying this reservoir host is the one that makes the parasite available for the transmission to another host and is usually not affected by the infection, right? Yeah, there are potential sources of human infection. Accidental host, a host that is under normal circumstances not infected with the parasite. That's an accidental host. Yeah, that is an accidental host. Okay, so there are also some examples that we can give, and the parasite with man as intermediate or secondary host, but we'll look at that in the second lecture. The carrier host. The carrier host is a vertebrate animal which had suffered from an infection and in later stage carries the infective organisms in its body without showing any clinical signs. A carrier. A carrier host. This is actually very simple to understand because we know what a carrier host, a carrier, the word carrier in medical field means. So we expect that it does not have to show any clinical signs. Yes. So this is the end of our introduction to medical parasitology. And there are some things that we also need to know. Remember, we would need to also know the sources of infection of these parasites. We would also need to know, apart from the sources of infection, we need to also know the life cycle of parasites, right? Life cycle of parasites, I'll just shout out this. The life cycle of parasites can either be the direct life cycle or indirect life cycle, but I think we'll talk about those in the next lecture. So in this lecture, we have discussed introduction to medical parasitology. We've defined parasitology. We've defined the classes. We've talked about the classes of parasites of medical importance, and we've defined the parasitological terminologies that are important for now. Yes, so this is actually the end of this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. And last but not the least, I would love to thank you for your time and also for your attention. So subscribe, like, and comment, right? So if you want to enjoy more of this, if you feel this is helping you, please subscribe to this channel, like, and also comment. In the next lecture, we'll talk about the associations of these organisms. Thank you so much, and see you in the next lecture.